Hello, friends, and welcome to the PowHERful podcast. I'm your host, AJ McCord. In this podcast, we introduce you to powerful women who are changing the game in and outside of their field of play. These are women's stories, women who happen to be doing things that many of us can only dream of, but the lessons and inspiration they share is universal. Hey everybody, it's AJ McCord, host of the PowHERful podcast. This week, we have a summer and winter Paralympian who is making a difference in the storytelling around these athletes that we are often so one-dimensional about. Dani Aravich was born without her left hand and left forearm, but she competed athletically all through high school and actually really didn't want to be a part of this Paralympic movement and scene and community. Instead was focused on really big dreams like becoming the first female GM of an NFL team. And it wasn't until a few years ago that she really started embracing everything that sport could offer her as a Paralympic athlete. And so she made her debut in 2021 and then in 2022. And now she is making a difference really from the inside out with Team USA while she prepares to compete in Milan Cortina in just a few months. This conversation with Dani Aravich is a reminder of how important it is to listen and not assume you know somebody's story just because of what they've shared. It's a good reminder for me personally, and I hope it will help all of us move forward in our lives and in our communities with just a little bit more intention and a little bit more curiosity than assumption. And so, with no further ado, I welcome Dani Aravich onto the podcast. She is a summer and winter Paralympian, currently based out of Montana, and a friend of somebody else who has been on the PowHERful podcast, Brenna Huckaby. You guys started Culxtred together. So, we're going to dive into all the things Paralympics, but I want to start with the fact that you are one of the few who has been both a summer and winter Paralympian. You competed in Tokyo and then like 6 months later competed in Beijing. Now you're getting ready for Italy. How the heck did you do all the things? How'd you do that?
Not with ease, let me say. I had gotten a lot of inspiration that you could do a summer and winter from my teammates, Kendall Gretsch, Oksana Masters, Aaron Pike, three who had been doing the summer winter back to back. And when I was started training in track and field, I got recruited to try this sport called cross country skiing, which I had never done prior. And I knew it was possible because my three Nordic teammates had done it, but obviously they had a lot more experience under their belts. And it was my debut at both those games for the summer and winter. So that tight timeline did not help. And it meant taking some sacrifices and some hits in both sports to maybe not perform to the best I could have if I went all in on one sport. But I did it, and I'm proud to say I did it. The double debut was the goal, and it's been nice though to focus just on the one thing for a while.
I can totally understand that. So you competed in track and field,
hmm
T47 400 meter in Beijing, and then you competed in Nordic, or I'm sorry, in Tokyo, and then you went to Beijing and you competed in Nordic where you got a top 10. So you didn't just debut, like you competed and did pretty well. But I want to go all the way back because obviously the Paralympics is having a really cool movement beginning. We saw it in Paris 2024. But what can you say about the growth of the attention on the Paralympics in even just the time since your debuts in Tokyo and
hmm
in Beijing?
I think Paris did a lot of really good things for it, and I think it's because a lot of people took to social media to talk about it, and I was a little worried that people would be hesitant to speak about it because there still is the stigma of talking about disability and people not understanding the sports and are they going to be able to comprehend it because they are
Mm.
complicated. And that's why it's so important that we get broadcasters in place and experts, whether they're former athletes or coaches or people who have studied it, because there is a lot of details that you might not have to think about when you watch the Olympic side of sports. And I think viewers like to understand what they're watching and have those context clues when it comes to it. So I was a little bit nervous that people would like be hesitant, and I think the world really embraced it. And I think a lot of that is credit to the Paris organizers. I think they really helped the city and the country of France get behind it. And, I got to be there in Paris and go to a lot of the events. And one of the nights I went to track and field, it was sold out. So there was almost 70,000 people in person watching Paralympic track and field. And, I was trying to look around and understand who the audience was. Like, were they global, family friends? Like, who are these 70,000 people? And while those people were there, it was so many Parisians and so many teenagers and so many young people. And I was just really impressed that all of these people were, choosing to spend their Tuesday evening at the track and embracing this event. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll have that moment for the Winter Games because I think we have yet to see the attention and the fandom and all of that for a Winter Paralympics. I think we've seen it for Summer Games like London 2012, and now I think Paris also set a new standard. So I'm very hopeful that one of the Winter Games, but the Winter Games do have a lot more, difficulties for fans just in the nature that events are very far apart from each
Right.
other. It's different athlete villages and different locations because obviously it's hard to have, an area that has a alpine mountain that's steep enough for, the Super G that also has a half pipe that also has a bobsled track and a hockey arena. So there's so many
Exactly.
more things. And that's why I think Salt Lake 2034 will have a great opportunity because it is so much more centralized into one place that I think fans will be able to get to tons of different stuff. Transportation will hopefully be seamless, and I'd be really proud of the US if we could be kind of the backbone of the standard of attention on a winter games.
I love that. And it's so interesting because so I have covered Paralympic athletes for more than a decade now. My first introduction was Sochi in 2014 when Elena Nichols was competing in the Paralympics in Sochi. And that was my first like real introduction into it. But my, family has been involved in California with CAF, with the Challenge Athletes
Hmm.
Foundation, and making sure that there's accessibility with, getting people out in the ocean because that's my passion. My safe place is the water. And so it's been fantastic to see it grow, but I love what you called out there and you put it on your Instagram too. You said that your biggest worry about the internet not latching onto the Paralympics is the potential fear of saying something wrong or offensive when it comes to disability. And you say, as a two-time Paralympian, you're here to dismantle the fear, post about it, ask questions about it, and don't worry about saying the wrong things. Make the memes about the funny moments, the sad moments, the moments of triumph, just as you did for the Olympics. Why is it so critical for you to dismantle that stigma and that anxiety and that fear for people to talk about the Paralympics and Paralympians?
People rightfully have fear because we live in a culture where people are getting canceled left and right, and disability is very unknown to a lot of people. And so it's very scary to talk about. And I totally understand because for most of my life, until I entered into this space of the Paralympics, I didn't identify with having a disability. I did not want to be a part of that community. I didn't understand it,
Mm,
so I also had fear around it. And, when we think about Paralympics and Paralympic sport, at the end of the day, it's elite level sport. And that seems to be often missed, unfortunately, in the messaging because people
yeah.
do see the disability first rather than, the 4, 8, 10, 30 years of training that went into that one moment on television of a athletic performance. And people, just are so afraid of saying the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, these are athletes. And, if there is a really hilarious crash or fall, like, talk about it again exactly how you would if you saw that on the Olympic side, because those are the things that bring more fans and more attention in. And if you, see the best finish you've ever seen, like I always think about my teammate Kendall Gretsch in the 2020 Tokyo Paralympics for the wheelchair class of triathlon, in an hour and 10-minute race. She won the race by 0.01 seconds and just barely beats the next person across the finish line. And like, people should be talking about that type of stuff. And we at our company Culxtred, we want to always focus on the sport and those moments first before we talk about the disability, because there is this tendency to focus on the disability and really be talking about, these stories of overcoming an injury or a
Hmm.
tragedy or any of that. And that consumes the entire story then, when probably the athlete wanted to talk about, like, actually, that was a bad race for me for this reason. Did not feel inspiring. I
Yeah.
am disappointed with this performance, or I'm pumped about this performance because of this, and I want to tell you about this. And we, as the media, as the athletes, have to constantly be chasing better storytelling for them, because otherwise the sports don't grow, because
Right.
it can't always be this feel good story. Like, we know that from watching every other sport we enjoy, whether it's, professional football here in the US, or it's the Olympics, or whatever it might be. We need all of those moments. We need, the rivalries that exist, and we need the good guys versus the bad guys versus your hometown team versus your favorite athlete. We need all of those different pieces to the puzzle to make sports interesting and fun and gain fans. And if we only talk about these stories that often are driven from this inspiration porn concept, then we are not building a true base of fans.
Yeah. Okay. Talk more about that because it is something that I've heard from multiple Paralympians, this idea of inspiration porn, which straight
Mhm.
up was not a term that I knew until within like the last year. But it is so interesting because I think there's more to be said about that because as somebody who's always been drawn to the story, to the heart of what
Mhm.
makes somebody tick, what makes them capable of doing these crazy things that most could never
Mhm.
dream of, whether it is competing for Team USA, missing your left hand and forearm, or dropping into a barrel in Tahiti because these waves are massive and insane, right? These are two things that I cannot imagine actually the reality of doing and having that be
Mhm.
my life. However, the human experience of overcoming, of figuring out how to pick yourself back up and choose
Mhm.
to make the most of your circumstances, or choosing to paddle in despite being afraid of it, choosing to do an
Mhm.
adventure despite the fear. Those are the tangible, like relatable points that I
Mhm.
can see as a broadcaster, as a human, as a way to develop authentic fans. So talk more
Mhm.
about the balance between telling the story and finding those those ties human to human with not turning a Paralympian and their story into simply inspiration porn.
Mhm. I believe it all comes down to letting the athlete drive the
Mhm.
conversation or where the story's going. I think
Yeah.
often the media comes into a conversation, into an interview where they want it to go. And so they are going to lead you with questions about, what was it like growing up without your hand? Or did you feel left out of sports because you were different than everyone else? Or, if for someone who's gone through an injury that led to their disability, like getting really into the
Mm,
points about that. And it's
yeah.
like, yes, that might be for the athlete part of why they tick the certain way, or what, you know, made them become who they now are, but it's always letting them drive it, because, maybe on that particular day, they just really don't want to talk about their disability,
Yeah.
or, maybe they have been going through something else this past year, like a sport-related injury
Yeah.
or, a big life change, and that's what they're overcoming. Like, they're overcoming being told, you have now this injury unrelated to your disability from your sport that, like, how are you going to come back and make the games? Like, or yeah, a major life event that could have totally shifted something. And like for that and them, that's so much more of the piece of the puzzle that might be relatable to the audience. And I think for the media, it's always then thinking about why you're asking the things you're asking. And if it is to get to, this point of like, this is a feel good story, I'm trying to make it one, and I'm asking these questions to get them there, like that's part of the problem because,
Mm,
most of us do not find ourselves inspiring because of our disabilities. We find ourselves inspiring because, yes, you had the courage to take a leap of faith and leave a career to start training, or because your classification got cut from the games and you had to compete against people who had less impairments than you. There's so many other things that I think make Paralympians inspiring that actually have nothing to do with their disabilities in their daily lives. And we are not here to exist to make someone else feel good about their life. And that's where I think the media sometimes gets it wrong is, you see the headlines like born without legs, this person overcame the odds and is a Paralympian. And, they know probably not that much about what that person's experience actually was like.
right.
And the assumptions are made, and sometimes they might be correct, but oftentimes they are wrong. So I think it's very important to think about why you're asking these questions, what you're trying to get to, what assumptions are you making, and hopefully that can be stopped by letting the athlete lead the conversation.
Mm. I love that. And honestly, it's such a good reminder for me personally, as somebody who interviews all the time. Like, I have
Mhm.
a whole set of notes because I truthfully believe that preparation is what leads to the closest
Mhm.
thing to perfection, right? And so I
Mhm.
have all these notes on like coming into an interview, but it is such an art to and a human practice, even as the
Mhm.
person who's supposed to be driving a conversation, to listen first and to let the athlete drive the conversation. And as we move into Italy and all of these questions of, okay, explain to me, what sled hockey is, right? Like, explain to me sled hockey. That's always a sport that everybody loves to get behind. Or wheelchair curling is going to
Mhm.
be at the same venue as downhill skiing, not same venue, same town. They're both in Cortina. But
Mhm.
it's such a good reminder to just sort of view everybody, regardless of their classification, as a whole human being, because that's what you are. Yes, some people are coming into this as their first Paralympics, having not be somebody who would have qualified for the Paralympics 4 years ago when they came around, right? Because there was an injury, because there was a trauma, because there was a moment. Some people are coming into this like you, where you've lived with this your whole life. You've lived without your left hand, without your left forearm, and you've been an athlete your whole life, might I add. Like,
Mhm.
I was looking back at all the sports that you competed in high school, all of them in just your high school division, not in anything, specifically. And it's such a good reminder to just not come into it with the arrogance that you know what the story is.
That's a great way to phrase it. I like that.
Yeah. So, with that, I'm so excited to talk a little bit about your road to Milan and what you're working on right now in Bozeman, Montana. I see a lot of biking on the Instagram. So, I like the cross training here for Nordic. But for those who don't know the Nordic classifications, can you break down what you're going to be competing in?
So most of our athletes globally in para cross country, aka para Nordic, also compete in para biathlon, which is something very different than the Olympic side because we are still quite a bit smaller. And for a long time, those two sports were governed by the same international federation. And so many of our competitions, World Cups, World Championships, even the games, had both biathlon and cross country ski races. They've since been separated into different international federations, but for the games, for example, they'll basically change each every few days. There'll be a cross country race, there'll be a biathlon race. And for those two sports, we have three different larger classifications based on your impairment. And so I am in the standing classification, meaning you ski on two skis. You compete in both classic and skate techniques. And depending on then your subclassification determines whether you use two poles, you use one pole, you use no poles, and you get a percent. We call it the factor that basically is determined by classifiers and the classification system that is taken off your total time. So if you were to ski, I don't know, 30-minute whatever race, I for skate am a 96% factor. So they basically take 96% of that time, and that is what my result is on
Ah,
paper. And similarly for the sitting class, that means every athlete is in a sit ski, this bucket made of either carbon, some types of plastic. They compete against each other but have subclassifications. And then lastly, visual impairments similarly have a spectrum, so that determines what the factor will be. So I compete against basically any woman who's standing. And at the games, we have 7 events, 3 cross-country ski races, 3 biathlon races, and 1 team relay.
oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, we
It's
have
a
a
lot.
lot of events. Yeah, there's 7 in, I believe the games are 9 days long, so you get like
Let's
2 break days.
go
Not
really
every,
fast.
yes, not a ton of time to recover, but I haven't decided. I technically haven't qualified for the games. We won't find out until January time. But if I qualify, I will likely probably not do every event. I'm not sure which one I will sit out quite yet. Um, but that's kind of how many of the athletes will go about it. We'll kind of look at the schedule and determine, okay, like what days make sense to race. Cross country is quite a bit different, I would say, than like track and field or swimming in the sense that people might have a preference. Like I might be a better sprinter compared to middle distance, but most athletes compete in a wide variety of both the skate and classic discipline and then distances. So it's not like you probably go and be like, I'm only doing the one sprint race because I'm only a sprinter. Like people have kind of a wide variety of the types of races they compete in, and definitely have preferences to some, but some athletes like Oksana Master is on my team, Jake
Mhm.
Adikoff, like they are strong at every distance they compete in, and ours don't necessarily have just a bread and butter specialty because they're so good at everything.
I love that. Okay, so when we're talking about Italy in particular and getting ready for it, I joked about some of the training that you're doing with biking, but can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about how you're getting ready for it? Because I think there's a massive misconception with both Olympians and Paralympians that you just kind of show up and qualify the year of qualifications and that's it. But that's not the case. You have competitions year in and year out. So, what have you been doing since we last saw you in the Paralympics to get ready for this Paralympics?
Yes, that is a huge misconception, and it drives me nuts because I feel like when people ask me about like athletic success, they're always asking about Paralympic Games medals, and it's like, okay, I don't have one of those, but I am a world champion and I have a World Cup medal. And people put obviously so much weight behind the games, but in those 4 years, there's so many different competitions that sometimes matter more to athletes because, maybe there's more money on the line, like maybe the
Mm,
prize purse is better, or maybe, it's yeah, like a world championship often is, for us at least in the US on our team, it's often harder to make a world championship roster than it is the Paralympic Games roster. So
yeah.
there is a lot of different things that carry still a lot of weight. So since Beijing, we've had, 3 now full seasons of we've had, oh gosh, I think three world championships since Beijing, across Nordic and biathlon. We've had many World Cups. Training, is 11 months out of the year for this sport. The only off month is
Jeez.
April. And then you start back in May, even though there might not be snow on the ground or you might not have access to it. You are starting to put in base training, and cross country skiers are very focused on yearly hours trained.
Mm,
Whereas coming from like collegiate distance running, it was very focused on mileage. And it's like, depending, how long it took you is how long it took you. But like, we focus on how many miles did you train this week? How many miles did you train this year? For Nordic, it is all about hours trained. So you are looking at your year and figuring out, when do you have the capacity to do a lot of volume? When are
yeah.
you going to focus on like shorter anaerobic, like trying to do a lot more intensity type of workouts? Um, and so you kind of like lay out this year and figure out how many hours am I trying to train in this year. And you basically just start building in May, and you're roller skiing, you're biking, you're running, you're swimming, you're integrating strength training. You are basically doing any type of cardio based activity that can help you build your aerobic capacity and get you ready to go skiing for really long amounts of time. And that's something I really appreciate about this sport. Like, I don't think I could be an elite cyclist ever because I don't think I could only cycle. Like, I do like that I can like look at my week and, have my key workouts where I'm trying to go
Yeah.
really hard, really fast on roller skis, but then I can also be like, all right, I need to get 3 hours in on Sunday. I'm gonna go for a big mountain run or long bike ride. And it's really fun. And I think that's one thing about the culture about Nordic skiing as I'm learning it now, only being into like year four of it, is everyone's just an outdoors person. Like everyone just wants to
Yeah.
spend time outside playing in the mountains and doing long, fun activities, which is a really cool cultural aspect to the sport as well.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I did an interview in the last season with Gwen Rudy, who is trying to make the ski mountaineering team, which is making its debut in
Yeah.
Cortina or in Italy in 26. And it was the same thing where she's just like, I just like being outside. All of us just want to spend all day, every day outside, which I personally can relate to. It's a lot of dry land time for me. I would appreciate a little bit more water incorporation, whether that's like rafting, kayaking, surfing, something like that. But I do love that just culture of people who compete
Hmm.
in endurance sports in particular is there's just like this desire to stay outside. And one of the things with
Hmm.
that, obviously, you have a very full calendar with your schedule for training to try and compete for the Paralympics and get that Paralympic medal that, will be added to your many others. But you also have an incredible history in the workforce in sports in general that I want to talk about because you started working for the Jazz straight after college. You've had experience with the Pacers, the Colts. So, walk me through how your roles with those teams have impacted the way that you are building Culxtred and the way you're honestly building a brand for yourself on social media and outside of your sport. Because I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's an offensively high number of Olympians and Paralympians who live below the poverty line. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
them who do not make enough money doing their sport to have it be their full-time job. So give me a little bit of
Hmm.
background of your experience in professional, sort of mainstream sports and how that's played into what you're doing now.
I always wanted to work in sports, and I went to college, not knowing anything about Paralympics, and I was focused on getting my career started after college. I went also to run, and I ended up leaving the team midway through college. And I was very focused on how I'm gonna get that job. And I just wanted to be like the first female GM of an NFL team and be a powerhouse business woman
Okay.
in
I like
sports.
that goal.
And I was very lucky that I was able to do some internships with professional teams in town, football and basketball, and then was looking for my first job out of school, knowing, I'd probably have to start pretty ground zero wherever I went and would just have to work my way up and be willing to grind it out. Like, I think working in professional sports and so many different areas of business is a lot like sports. It's a
Yeah.
lot of time for often a little pay at the beginning in
Girl,
the
I
hopes
know
that
that.
you get somewhere else.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nope. I
Like,
know that.
oh my gosh, it is not a dream life, let's just say, for a bit there. You really have to sacrifice a lot of time and a lot of like financial opportunity that you probably, if you were working somewhere else, like when I started in sales in the NBA, and even while I was selling well, I was like hearing about people who had gone into tech sales or med device, and I was like, damn, like I could have been making a lot more
You're like,
money
shoot,
there.
my bank account is missing that.
Yeah, but I get to watch basketball games instead. And, it taught me a lot. And I think at the time, my challenge at the job I was at was trying to be a standout female in particular, because I think the culture still in a lot of professional sports orgs has been very male dominated. And it was while I was working there that I started to learn about the Paralympics, research it, and I was kind of curious about, how I could get back into athletics because I never
Hmm.
ended my personal athletic career on a great note. And that's what led me to start training. And so I was training while I was working, and that in professional sports. And it was really difficult. And the timelines, and again, like the money stuff and trying to afford the sport with what I was making. And so I ended up moving into a part-time role at the org and thought I'd just do that for a year to see if I could get to the Tokyo trials at least to make
Mm.
the team. And I then got introduced to Nordic during that time frame. And I still, though, very much set a hard stop, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't, but I'm hard stopping after 2022 and I'm going back to work because like I'm not going to allow my business career to slip. And ultimately the pandemic happens. I get laid off of the job in the NBA. And so desperate for money. I was trying to find something, and I had always been curious about social media, but like I was in college 2014 to 2018. So it's like
Yeah.
social media marketing was coming up, but
Yep.
it wasn't really being taught in school quite yet. And
And I'll say, because I was in college at the same time ish, and I'll say
mm,
also, it's not just that it wasn't being taught, it was that there was so much question about how to use it, right? Because
mhm,
you could have a public profile and there was still like
mhm,
a, well, wait a minute, from a journalism perspective, there was very much like, well, wait, you don't want to share your personal life because you're not the
mhm,
story, and that's going to make you biased or come off biased in your coverage, right? So even
um,
though it's not even that it wasn't being taught, it was that everybody was like, wait a minute, how is this going to affect people's careers? Because if you post something
mhm,
personally, it could follow you to a job, and like you
mhm,
could get passed over for what you post, and da da da. So it was all such learning, so much learning.
mhm. Yes, I feel like there wasn't the realization of how powerful it would be for
Hmm.
business and for, yeah, brand. I don't think like the concept of the influencer probably still it was people just assumed, maybe they're making some money now, but that's not gonna
Yeah.
last. It's not
Right, right.
sustainable.
And it
And
was like
so
so
yeah, just
cringy. It was like that was the cringe. The cringe was like, ugh, you're using social media to get paid or to like get product, and it was like, ugh, it's just gross. It was like
yeah.
there was a
It
cringe to it even.
100%. And yeah, I know it's being taught way more now in school. And I'm still like, I'm actually in like a grad certificate program right now, even doing like trying to do more on it. And it's funny even to see that it still hasn't been now updated in like 3-ish years. So we're talking about Twitter way more than I think we'd be talking about now. And like threads is not even a concept on there
Oh
yet or
gosh.
anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So a little behind there, but yeah, I think it's, I was curious about it. Like, I definitely felt like I had somewhat of a creative eye. I'd liked photography, and I ended up finding a remote role, which worked really well when I'm now trying to pick up this training with Kodiak Cakes, which is a
Mm,
protein pancake company, and I started working on their social media team. And so I was learning a lot from a brand, and that was 2020, that was rapidly growing actually in the influencer marketing space. And really seeing, like the power of social media and spreading the word about the company and the message and also the actual product. And so I was very lucky that I found that, and I was like, wow, this idea of working, remote and not full time, more like a freelancer, works pretty well with training.
yeah,
And I was spending so much money on training. Like over these 2 years of trying to qualify for Tokyo, I spent in coaching fees, travel to the races, because I wasn't on the team, so none of that is
right.
provided. And so to
Oy,
get to the point where was able to qualify for the games, up until that point, I spent almost $30,000 just on like direct training, but I
oh,
obviously wasn't making much. And so it was very much a hodgepodge. I decided, maybe I could go find some like freelance clients of small businesses and do their social, and ended up, through some of that, landing a job for a bit in casting. And so I worked in casting for Meta, and it was the first time where then, I started being involved in this Paralympic community and meeting more folks with disabilities and understanding a bit more about that. And I focused on casting those people for these meta marketing projects. And it was the first time I kind of got to combine, that interest in like the media marketing space with now this like new understanding about disability. And so I was able to kind of combine those. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And the idea that I can like give this person an opportunity,
mm,
a paid opportunity, to share a bit of their story, because it was real people casting. So finding real
wow.
stories that already existed was so cool. And that's something I really took with me, was like seeing the power of the storytelling of the stories that existed amongst the community. And, very fortunately, I just, as I continued to find some more opportunities in the space, ended up about 3 years ago landing a job with the Olympic and Paralympic Committee on the digital media team. And so it's been a really interesting experience, being an athlete competing for this organization, but then also seeing the flip side of
Yeah.
the digital media team. But I feel very fortunate because then I can, help push a lot of our Paralympic stories that exist, and help really try to connect the athletes to Team USA at large. But I always said when I started competing, because I obviously went back on my word of saying I was going to stop after 2022 and
Which, thank
go back
goodness.
to the
Thank goodness.
go back to the office. The one thing I always said was like, no matter what, no matter how much money I could make from sport, because I really didn't think I was going to make anything from sport. Even when, when I got my first sponsorship around Beijing, I was like, this probably won't happen again. So like, gotta make sure, I'm still working. But I always said, my LinkedIn resume better be a hell of a lot better than my athletic resume by the time I finish. And I know that, not every athlete is as fortunate as me, in the sense that I had the business experience prior. I
Hmm.
went to college to get my degree. Like, not everyone has that opportunity, but something I want to continue to see for all these athletes is that, they are starting to hone their skills outside of sport, or
Yep.
take the skills they learn and see how they can transform that into a career, because that's a huge problem in our space is employment post and employment during, because
Hmm.
the money that comes in from Olympic and Paralympic sports, unless you're part of this very select few, is so minimal that you, to be a human that can pay rent and, have health insurance and all these things that are required to exist, you might need a job. And so I hope people in companies and organizations can start to see, how athletes can transfer those skills. So
Yeah.
I'm very lucky, but I just love the space, and it's so cool to see, starting out in those major sports, now being an Olympic and Paralympic marketer focused person, like the Olympic and Paralympic space is just so special and so unique. And I think working with the athletes is my favorite thing because none of them that I really get to experience or work with, even when I've been on the other side working for Team USA or when I worked in sports sponsorship sales, like these Olympians and Paralympians are so grateful for opportunities and are just such
Yeah.
a pleasure to work with.
Yeah.
And I can say I didn't always get that experience in the NBA and the NFL.
Yes, I know. It's something that is, there's something very pure about the vast majority of Olympic, Paralympic, and action sport athletes. As somebody who
Hmm.
has covered, I've covered the NFL, I've covered the NBA, I cover college football. Like, there's something epic about those sports and about those athletes. But as somebody who's always drawn to the story, to the human story, there is something, there's something special about the athletes who exist in these spaces. And maybe it goes back to what you're talking about with like even the community that you train in is people just want to be outside, right? Like people are just doing this to be outside and like training and don't mind the training because we're going to spend 5 hours outside and that's a great day. And so, but there's something special about it and I feel it too.
Hmm.
So I'm so grateful that you're in that spot with Team USA, that you didn't go back to the office job. However, fully support the idea of you becoming a female GM. Like, let's go after that after we win a Paralympic medal or seven more. So that would be my personal vote.
Well, I don't think, even after the sport itself is done, that I could ever leave the Olympic and Paralympic
Yeah.
space now. Yeah, it's just so special and phenomenal. And with LA coming up and then Salt Lake City, that we're going to be hosting both a summer and winter games, like I think there's going to be so many good opportunities for
Yeah.
athletes in this space to get jobs, to work, whether it's on the brand side, the media side, the organizing committee side. So I hope to continue to exist in this space even
Yeah.
when the sport itself has wrapped.
1,000,000%. And the space is grateful to have your experience in it because it
Oh,
matters a ton. So,
thank
okay, we're gonna transition now because I could talk to you forever about Paralympic and
you.
Olympic sports and how we can expand the spotlight so much more than it is. But we're gonna switch gears. This is our Something to Sip On segment. It is brought to you by the Sports Bra, which is the very first women's sports bar that we know of in the entire world. Started in Portland, Oregon. And I want to know, Dani, what are you sipping on? It can be a cocktail, a mocktail, a beverage, like any kind of beverage. What are you sipping on after a
Oh,
hard day playing outside?
I am a beer snob. I worked at a
Nice.
brewery. I love beer, but I also love cocktails. I also love wine. I I think this is one thing that's really funny about endurance athletes is they either are like big drinkers or they don't drink at all.
Or
And that's like
sober.
the
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah. And I fall to one side and I am a big fan of an adult beverage. So this summer I have been scaling back a bit. So I have been NA beering it quite a bit,
Oh,
and
nice.
I think there's a ton of great options out there. But ooh, yeah, I'll say NA beer, but occasionally we might toss in an alcoholic beer too.
I like it. I like it. I love 805 just came out with an NA, and then I still think Athletic
Mm,
Brewing is like the goat of NA beers. They've been so committed to it for so much longer
hmm.
that it is so good. It's so good. Okay, I love that. Our next segment is called Powered Up. So this is where I ask you three semi off the cuff random questions about what keeps you powered up
Okay.
for your sport. So the first one is, what is the one thing that you have to double, triple, quadruple check on your equipment before you can be confident that you are ready for the race?
That my boots are tied a certain way. And what is the bummer is with missing my hand, I can tie shoes, but I can't tie them very tight. And
Oh,
I have to have my boot tied really tight, like almost to the point where people assume I'm losing circulation. And so we basically like designate a staff member, whether it's a wax tech or a coach, on the day of a race to be my boot tire. And we like make a plan of where we'll meet, amidst the chaos of a race day for them to tie my boot and like get my cuff all tight. And that like has to be done how I like it, or I feel like I can't ski correctly, even though I probably could, but it like has to be a certain amount of tight on
I
my
get it.
ankle.
You're like, I need to feel the indentation of the tie through the shoe onto my foot. I love that. And I love that you have somebody who's your designated tire on the day of the race. That is a well-oiled machine of a team, I'll tell you that. Okay, and then you are competing on the Nordic course. You are in a moment where you go, "Oh man, I don't know if I can do this any longer." What is the thing that you tell yourself, or whose voice comes into your head that gets you through the worst moment?
Ooh. So it's usually my own voice, and it's always, like a conversation. It's so cliche, but like a devil and an angel on your shoulder of someone telling you you can, and someone who's like, it'd be okay if you stopped. But I try to tell myself to think about just what I'm doing in that moment because something I've been working on in sports psychology is we as humans have a tendency to paint ourselves narratives or stories and tell ourselves that is the truth and that is reality when it's probably not true. Like the thoughts, that can creep in during a race, like everyone's going to be mad at me if I don't do well, or like my career's over, or, like why did I even like bother doing this, or I shouldn't have come, or whatever it is. Like those
Mm,
are not reality. And we tell ourselves these to like cope with the discomfort. But if you can draw your attention to something in the present, that will help you like release that narrative that's not serving you. And so the way I do this, and I often do this when I like lay down on the mat to shoot my rifle, is I actually speak out loud to myself. And some people are like, you shouldn't be able to speak if you're going that hard. I'm like, if I'm going really hard, I can speak because I am in control. And I like literally will say something to myself out loud, like, all right, Dani, you're doing this right now. Or I might say the technique thing I'm focused on
mm.
to try to stay in that moment. Or sometimes I talk to the coaches on the side of the course or my competitors I've even have. Like if they're passing me or I'm passing them, I'll literally like say something like, you crushed that last hill, like damn, or something. And that helps me hear audibly something that's in that moment and present.
I love that. Oh, that is so good. Okay, and then the last question is, do you have a quote from a sports movie or a sports movie in general that is like a go-to if you need inspiration, a go-to if you need to feel like a total badass? Like, what pop culture thing are you relating to?
So I was very anti like music when I trained or pre-race because I was like, I don't get to listen to it when I'm out there alone in the woods, so I should do it without. But I do struggle transparently, with motivation sometimes. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about is that people who literally get paid or expected to do exercise struggle sometimes to do the said
Yeah,
task
I
at
mean,
hand.
just like everybody
Be-
else. Yeah.
Like it can be hard to get through some, especially, if you're training by yourself or,
Mhm.
the workout's really boring and you just need to like get it through it. And so I, decided, okay, I'll start listening to stuff to see if that helps get me through it. And I found these Spotify compilations of motivational speeches. It's called Motiversity. And it's a lot of speeches. I mean, they do Kobe Bryant, they do like old Arnold Schwarzenegger, like just all these people who do these motivational speeches. And there is one called Dog Mentality, and it's basically just like men screaming at you about like how to release your inner dog. And I like love that low key. And I just think about that sometimes. But one of my favorite quotes when I get overwhelmed, since this balance of work and business and training sometimes for a different sport and like life get overwhelming and I feel like I'm not doing enough for one of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
My agent, Ian Beck, who was an elite level speed skater, he told me once when I was telling him, I'm like, how am I supposed to do this all and like be great at all these different things? And that's part of, you know, my brand and who I am is that I do all these different things. Like I'm not siloed into one thing. And he said, why does it have to be all or nothing? And I think about that pretty regularly because it's like, if we are wanting to do more than one thing, yes, you're not going to be all in on one of those things, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like you can
Yeah.
do a lot and do it well, and you don't necessarily have to decide. And that's, for
Mm.
other athletes, I know that's probably not what their mindset would be because they are 100% all in on their sport all the time, and that's how they become the best. But there's also other ways that people can achieve success, and it might be by doing it in quite a different lifestyle or quite a different way, and it might take longer or it might not happen. But, that's the decision I've made is that I'm going to do different things and be involved in
Mm.
different things. And I just really think about that a lot. Like everyone says, be all in or like 110%. And it's like, that's not realistic most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's more so about giving enough to get the result you would like.
Yeah.
So I think
Oof.
about
I
that
like
line.
that. Yeah, that's
Why does it
rewriting
have to be
some.
all or nothing?
My brain is getting rewired as you're talking. That's I'm gonna have to think about that one. But I love it. And then the last question that I have for you is obviously this is the PowHERful podcast. We're all about celebrating powerful women like yourself. What does PowHERful mean to you?
Okay. Powerful means showing up in whatever way that might exist and doing the relevant task at a high level with confidence. Because so often I think we do get wrapped up in the results and what happens from doing the task, whether it is winning a medal or like achieving a certain thing at work. But you don't get to that point without doing said task really well. And I think that is where like power comes from is having the ability and the preparations and all of that to show up and do the task really well and be confident in your ability to do it because that is something I think a lot of women, I think a lot of para athletes sometimes like because the world is saying is putting limitations on you, like you have to own what you do and feel a lot of confidence in the way you do it and how you do it. And sometimes the confidence might not be real and you have to fake it for a moment, but that will lead to real confidence.
I like that. Well, Dani, thank you so much for being on the PowHERful podcast. This has been awesome. I'm so grateful for you showing up as yourself day in and day out, both as an athlete and as somebody who lifts up other athletes. The Team USA and Paralympic and Olympic world is better because you're so invested in it. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you. That's a very, very kind statement and it means a lot because I do hope that the space is a little better than how I found it.
It absolutely is. And if you guys want to follow along, you got to shout out your Instagram handle because it's actually one of my
Um,
favorites.
Thank you. My Instagram handle is the one arm Dan spelled out, so TheOneArmDan. And Brenna and I founded Culxtred, which is a Paralympic media company if you want to learn more about Paralympic sports. And that is Culxtred. Don't ask about the X, it was a trademark issue.
As somebody who's dealt with trademarks, that is the most that is real. The spelling is oftentimes simply to get the trademark. Anyway, On that note, thanks for joining us on the PowHERful podcast. We'll see y'all next week. This is a reminder to check us out every Tuesday, everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you really enjoy this and don't want to miss an episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button.